Welcome to your Unit 3 set of videos. Make sure you know exactly what you need to do for this video, and let's go ahead and get started. Unit 3 videos. You're gonna learn about the post-classical era. Yeah! Alrighty, so for today's topic, we are looking at the evolution of Christian societies in Byzantine and Western Europe. So for our objectives, once again, we have our theme unit question: how do post-classical civilizations gain, consolidate, maintain, and lose power? Why does religion matter during the post-classical era? And lastly, what are the differences between the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church? So let's go ahead and get started here with a little mini intro to what we are going to be talking about. So both Byzantium and Western Europe were very much Christian-oriented societies. There were two big realms, misspelled big there, that started to create distinctive and competing forms of religion, even though they were both practicing Christianity. And Christianity during this point were principal sources of religious, moral, cultural authority. And eventually they became two rival communities. So let's go ahead and look at popes versus patriarchs. So Christianity during this point was the hierarchical organization that was more structured than any other major religious tradition. So for example, you have the Pope or the papacy. But the two most important Christian authorities during this time was the Bishop of Rome, or the Pope, as well as the Patriarch of Constantinople in the Byzantine Empire. So let's focus on the papacy, or the Pope, for a second. So when Western Rome collapsed, the papacy, or the Pope, right, Christianity itself, survived. They claimed that continuing spiritual authority over all the lands of the former Roman Empire. And at first, they were pretty close with the Byzantine emperors. But then towards the latter half of the 6th century, and we'll revisit this towards the end of this video, some shifts started to occur, where the Pope started to act a lot more independent from their patriarch relations. They devoted their efforts to strengthening Western Christian church that was based in Rome, as opposed to Rome and Constantinople. And then they became clearly distinguished from Eastern Christian churches in Constantinople. So an example of a pope that was doing a lot of good, but in the end started to really create this independent Christian sect is with Pope Gregory I, who is oftentimes referred to as Gregory the Great, which, wow, amazing, pictured right here for us. So Pope Gregory I faced an array of challenges, but the two that we're going to be looking at here is a Germanic threat versus the bishops assuming supremacy. So when looking at the Germanic threats, there was a pretty big threat by a Germanic group called the Lombards. And in response to this threat of being pillaged, Gregory essentially mobilized resources and organized the defense of Rome, thus saving the city and the church itself, which gained him a lot of popularity. But looking at the supreme ecclesiastical power, his response to individuals, to bishops wanting their own power, he essentially said the papal power, the Pope, was the supreme power. There is no other bishops or lesser positions than the Pope that could have extreme power in terms of the church. So the Bishop of Rome was ultimately the authority for all the Christian church. The contributions that he made, specifically emphasizing the sacrament of penance, meaning Pope Gregory I required individuals to confess their sins to priests and to atone for them. Now, looking at the counterparts, the patriarchs. They were very powerful officials, but they did not enjoy the independence like the Pope because the Byzantine emperors treated the church as a department of the state. The emperors would appoint the patriarchs as opposed to God appointing them. And they would instruct the patriarchs to deliver sermons that supported the imperial policy and supported obedience to the emperors. And when the Byzantine emperor, specifically Constantinople, first created the policy of Caesaropopism, nailed it, it really became a source of tension between the imperial and the ecclesiastical authorities. A major event that occurred first in the Byzantine Empire and then later in both areas of the post-classical Western world is iconoclasm. So most decisive ecclesiastical policy implemented by Byzantine emperors, most notably Emperor Leo III, was iconoclasm. So in the Byzantine Empire, there was a long tradition of producing icons. And icons are essentially just religious paintings of Jesus, of saints, of other religious figures. And it's also a pretty wonderful form of art. Most theologians saw icons as visual stimulations, which would inspire believers for reverence for holy saints. But when Emperor Leo came into the mix, he saw this as the veneration of images as being sinful, aka worshiping idols, aka they were all pagans if you were worshiping an icon as opposed to going to church. So his response was creating this essentially movement or this event called iconoclasm, meaning breaking of icons. And in response to that movement, it sparked a lot of protests and riots all throughout the empire. And the reason being is because icons were incredibly popular for the Byzantine Empire. Almost every single individual, yes, were Christian, and yes, did have icons depicting Jesus, the Virgin Mary, saints, etc., that they had in their homes, that they would worship in their homes. So they didn't want to get rid of them. And because of that, Emperor Leo III was forced to abandon this movement. So looking at these two different churches with the Pope and the Patriarch. So they both profess the same basic Christian doctrines. So the churches of Constantinople and Rome experienced increasing friction after the 6th century, specifically because of iconoclasm. Rome had different views on religious and theological issues, and where, at this point, iconoclastic movement became the main focus, where now Rome was looking at icons and starting to give their own opinions on it, thus creating a pretty big rift and rivalry. Over time, Christian churches in Constantinople and Rome disagreed on many points on how to practice rituals, doctrine, workings of theological teachings. And these are pretty relative minor issues. Like another minor issue, for example, is that the Byzantine theologians were shocked and baffled that the Western priests would shave their beards because the patriarch in Constantinople never shaved their beard, thus creating a pretty big event called the Great Schism, or split. So the Byzantine patriarchs and the Roman popes disagreed on their rights and their powers. The patriarchs saw that there was autonomy of all major Christian jurisdictions, including Constantinople, while the pope asserted power of Rome as the seat of authority for all of Christendom, which was the Christian European world, aka for all of Christians in Europe and in the Byzantine Empire. Thus, in 1054, the patriarch and the pope essentially mutually excommunicated one another. Excommunication meaning that you have essentially created like so much sin that you are banned from going to heaven, that God will not bring you into the heavens, that you are banned to hell without any redemption. So they essentially just mutually did that to one another, refusing to recognize the other's church as properly Christian. This event, called the Great Schism, and this event creates two Christian churches. The first being the Eastern Orthodox Church. It's also called the Greek Orthodox. And the next is the Roman Catholic Church. And that is where we will end it for today. So, what did we learn? A form of consolidation in Europe was through religion by creating two different rulers or two different churches. Religion was seen as central to life as many did not have hope after the fall of Rome. And lastly, there are many differences between the two churches, looking at power, their location, etc. But a main difference was through the use of icons, which at this point would essentially divide the Western world between how should you be a Christian, how should you practice your faith. Congratulations, you are done with this video. Once again, make sure you understand exactly what you need to do for it, and have a fantastic day.